The global music world seemed to crash to its lowest point when, at the age of 75, Andre Rieu, legendary king of the waltz, collapsed mid-performance. That moment changed everything. People were left asking what could have possibly triggered such a fall at the very height of his brilliance. To truly understand, we have to step back and look at what had shaped his life from the very beginning. Andre Rieu was born on October 1st, 1949, into a family where discipline was valued more than a child's happiness or imagination. He was the third of 6 children, growing up under the shadow of a father whose baton commanded not only the orchestra, but also the household. His father, also named Andre, was a highly respected conductor, admired on stage but feared at home. Within those 4 walls, there were no lullabies, no light-hearted laughter, and certainly no warmth. Love in that environment was cold and abstract, almost non-existent. Reflecting later in life, Rieu would quietly admit, "My parents didn't love me." He didn't say it with anger, but with a tone of fact, like an old wound that had scarred. Over, his mother, obsessed with discipline, grades, and achievements, saw imagination not as a gift, but as a flaw. For her, creativity was weakness, not strength. Whenever a teacher praised young Andre for his artistry, the appreciation returned home like a thunderclap of disapproval, shouted at him as if it were an accusation. But when he turned 5, everything shifted. Elegant 18-year-old violin. Teacher entered his life. It's unlike his parents. She didn't scold him or break him down. Instead, she nurtured his sensitivity. Through her bow's graceful sweep, little Andre experienced something he had never known before. Not romance, but freedom. For the first time, the sound of life trembled through him, and he stood in awe. That was the beginning. That magnetic pull toward music was not a triumph, but a spark that awakened something buried deep inside him. While other children practiced scales with mechanical precision, Andre chased resonance, searching for that elusive beauty only he could. Here yet joy was never without cost. As a teenager, his growing passion for waltzes clashed directly with his father's strict musical ideals. His lyricism, rich with emotion, was mocked within his own home. "I didn't raise you to play waltzes," his father once screamed. Words that didn't simply criticize a style, but sought to crush his very soul. The breaking point arrived around 1968, when Marjorie entered his life not as a conductor's scorer, but as his chosen companion. His mother met her with fury, demanding that she leave. That rejection was the last straw. That same night, Andre walked out of the family home and never looked back. His parents' house remained untouched, frozen in silence, while he rose to global stardom. Not once did his parents attend a concert, even as thousands filled arenas to see him. Despite the thunderous applause, Andre carried a hollow memory of absence. He later admitted, "I spent years in therapy trying to understand why my childhood felt so hollow." Applause never filled that void. Yet through music, he finally felt recognized. The violin wasn't just an instrument, it was his lifeline. After years of rigid orchestral training and enduring the sterile sound of formal concert halls, Andre broke free. He created the Maastricht Salon Orchestra, made up of 12 dreamers with no fancy costumes but endless hope. They played in modest venues, community halls, backyard weddings, forgotten border towns. They didn't play for critics or prestige. They played for music itself. And at the heart of it all stood Marjorie, steady and unseen. She managed the business, handled bookings, and even ghost road arrangements. She was the invisible backbone behind his visible magic. Their bold experiment grew. In 1987, Andre officially founded the Johann Strauss Orchestra with 12 musicians and a daring mission to restore joy to music. They rejected formality, abandoning black tailcoats for vibrant colors, inviting laughter and warmth. Their new Year's Day performance in 1988, bursting with light and melody, was ridiculed by critics but adored by audiences. By 1995, when they performed at the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna, their music stopped football fans mid-cheer, turning a stadium into a ballroom. The moment was legendary, catapulting Strauss and Company to the top of the charts for 19 weeks in the Netherlands, a feat unheard of for classical music. Success swept across the globe, even to Australia, where tens of thousands filled stadiums to watch what felt like a living fairy tale. Yet even amid triumph, opposition lingered. Traditionalists sneered, calling his work musical pornography, mocking his lights, gowns, and unrestrained joy. But to audiences, he wasn't degrading art. He was giving it back to them. Families danced, grandparents wept, and music became human again. With us, you don't feel the solemn hush that drives people away, Andre explained. He wasn't selling concerts. He was giving people hope. Behind the spotlight, though, the maestro was breaking. In 2010, at the peak of his fame, he was struck with a viral infection that attacked his inner ear. For a violinist, balance is everything, and suddenly his world tilted into chaos. Tours were canceled, performances abandoned. The man who had always stood tall admitted, "I can't." Bedridden, dizzy, and spinning, he seemed shattered. Months of therapy offered little relief, until a letter arrived from an Australian fan who had suffered the same illness. The fan suggested vestibular exercises that had helped him heal. Desperate, Andre tried them. Slowly, the spinning stopped. He stood again, first unsteady, then firm. He returned to the stage, not just as a musician, but as a survivor. Still, the wound never fully healed. His equilibrium remained fragile, a reminder of vulnerability. Then, in December 2016, grief struck. During a tour in Leeds, his longtime friend and trombonist Ruud Merckx died suddenly in his sleep. For Andre, it was an earthquake. Without hesitation, he canceled the tour. Nottingham, London, Birmingham, Glasgow, gone. This was not illness, but grief, raw and devastating. Ruud had been like a brother. The orchestra mourned together, and when the music eventually resumed, it carried the heavy weight of loss. Even then, he pressed forward. In 2019, when a fierce flu overtook him with fever and sweats, he still stepped onto the stage, smiling for the audience while fighting the sickness within. But in March 2024, in Mexico City, the breaking point finally came. Scheduled to perform 6 sold-out concerts, he faltered after just the second show. The high altitude, jet lag, and flu collided like storm clouds. Backstage, feverish and breathless, he whispered to Marjorie over the phone, "I don't want a first concert day like this ever again." 4 concerts were canceled. Over 40,000 ticket holders were furious. The orchestra, 125 people, was sent home mid-tour. Refunds and flight reversals followed, chaos replacing triumph. In that pause, something changed. His son Pierre stepped forward, not just as his son or tour manager, but as his protector. He shielded Andre from the grueling pace of international touring, limiting him to Europe, enforcing breaks, and prioritizing recovery. Every flight, every performance was carefully weighed. Could Andre do it without breaking? Pierre became the bearer of his father's weight, allowing him to continue without self-destruction. This collapse wasn't the fall of a maestro, it was the rebirth of one. Andre learned that music wasn't about endurance or sacrifice. It was about care, about living fully in each note. By the summer of 2024, that transformation was visible. The king of the waltz was no longer just a performer. He was human, vulnerable, and unforgettable. Not all the wounds had truly healed. At Tisherwood, Andre Rieu had built his life on constant touring, and slowing down carried a price he had never prepared for. For decades, the endless rhythm of the road had been his lifeline, like oxygen itself. Now, with his son Pierre stepping in to tighten the reins, each concert carried a new kind of weight. It was no longer just about entertaining his audience. It was also about proving to himself that he could still command the stage. That July, he returned to Maastricht, his hometown stage, a place where he always felt safest. Every face in the crowd knew his story, and every seat sold out instantly, just as they had for years. Yet behind the curtain, things were no longer routine. Preparation now meant more than rehearsals. Medical clearances had to be secured, oxygen kept backstage, and rest intervals were carefully built into the schedule. His team, once focused solely on lighting and sound cues, now coordinated with doctors and physical therapists to keep him strong enough to perform. The audience never saw the checklist taped discreetly inside his dressing room. It was a quiet acknowledgement that his body was no longer the silent partner it once had been. The list wasn't long, but it was precise. Hydrate before walking on stage. Limit encore lengths. Avoid handshakes until the heart rate settled. Pierre enforced these rules with the same authority his father had once demanded for tempo markings. And yet, even with all these safeguards, Andre sometimes pushed beyond. On the third night in Maastricht, he lost himself in the swell of a waltz and extended it far longer than planned. The orchestra followed his lead. The crowd rose to its feet, and for a moment, it felt like the glory of the past. But when he left the stage, his shirt clung to him, drenched with the same heavy sweat he remembered from Mexico City. Pierre's worried expression said what neither dared to speak aloud. They had come dangerously close to the line. These adjustments weren't just physical, they were artistic. Andre began quietly reworking his set lists, lowering the intensity in ways only the most trained ears would notice. The fast-paced, high-energy pieces became fewer, replaced by ballads, slower waltzes, and orchestral storytelling. Fans embraced the shift without realizing it was also a strategy. An illusion of endless stamina, carefully balanced with the reality of conserving energy. Away from the stage, Andre spent more time at home than he had in decades. The stone streets of Maastricht and the garden behind his 15th-century house became his new rehearsal hall. Instead of practicing for hours with the full orchestra, he rehearsed privately, conserving energy for performance days. Friends began noticing subtle changes in him, a softer rhythm in his voice, fewer late-night phone calls, and a rare willingness to say no. When Andre finally returned to the stage after his long health battle, the applause was not just loud, it was emotional. It wasn't merely celebration, it was relief. For months, no one knew if the King of the Waltz would ever perform again. His viral infection in 2009 had forced him to stop mid-tour. Doctors had warned him that resuming too soon could end his career permanently. Yet for Andre, quitting was never an option. His first comeback concert took place in Antwerp, with tickets sold out long before his illness. Many assumed the performance would be shorter, but instead, Andre delivered 3 full hours of music without cutting a single piece. He greeted the audience with his trademark warmth, but observant fans noticed the differences. He sat between numbers. He paced himself carefully. And for the first time in decades, Pierre remained visible at the side of the stage, watching every moment by then. Pierre had already been quietly running much of the business during his father's illness, overseeing productions, managing schedules, and ultimately deciding whether the tour would even continue. Now, his role was openly part of the performance, a safety net for his father. In later interviews, Andre admitted that Pierre had been given strict orders to step in. He showed signs of dizziness. The responsibility was heavy. It was no longer only about music. It was about protecting his father's life. Midway through the 2010 tour, a moment unfolded that fans still remember vividly. During the encore in Maastricht, Andre paused and invited Pierre to the stage. The crowd erupted as Pierre, reluctant but smiling, stepped into the spotlight. Andre handed him a microphone and asked him to sing along with the orchestra. Pierre wasn't a trained singer, but no one cared. The audience cheered louder, touched by the rare glimpse of father and son sharing their bond live on stage. Clips spread quickly online, showing Andre not just as the maestro, but as a father. Behind the scenes, though, the grind of touring remained punishing. Andre's recovery required careful scheduling. Yet touring the world left little room for rest. Brazil's heat was suffocating. Australia's jet lag was brutal. The set lists had to be rearranged, placing the most physically demanding numbers early in the concert while Andre's energy was still at its peak. Even then, the danger remained. A recurrence of his illness could bring everything crashing down. Again, Pierre's role grew even larger. He wasn't only managing logistics anymore, he became his father's quiet guardian. making hard decisions that sometimes overruled Andre's instincts. Though father and son occasionally clashed, Andre knew Pierre's caution was the reason the music could go on. Fans began noticing that Andre's concerts had become more intimate. He spoke to audiences more, weaving stories between pieces. It wasn't just a tactic to rest. It was a conscious choice to bring audiences deeper into his world, the triumphs, the fears, and the victories. By 2012, the massive tours resumed, across continents, but the shadow of his illness never fully left. Andre admitted in interviews that the experience had changed him. He no longer saw himself as invincible. Every performance now felt like a gift, not a certainty. Financially, the comeback was extraordinary. The tours grossed millions, DVD sales soared, and the annual Maastricht concerts became global cinema events. Yet beneath the glitter lay a constant balancing act, delivering the grandeur fans expected while protecting the man at the center of it all. Pierre's hand in the business grew stronger. He negotiated longer setup times at venues to avoid rushing rehearsals, insisted on medical staff at every performance, and began quietly preparing for a reality Andre rarely acknowledged. What would happen when he could no longer tour at this scale? By 2016, the schedule still demanded over 100 performances a year and non-stop travel, changing climates, and the strain of leading an orchestra across countries. Fans saw only the magic of the music. They didn't see the exhaustion when the lights went dark. That year, during a concert in Vienna, Andre paused unusually long between numbers. Pierre stepped closer, watching intently. The music continued, but something felt different. Later, Andre admitted he had felt lightheaded during the set. He finished the show, but both men carried the memory. It was a chilling reminder that no matter how careful they were, the risk would never disappear. From then on, Andre scaled back, physically demanding parts of his shows. He gave his orchestra members more space for solos, allowing himself brief rests while the flow of the concert continued seamlessly. Fans loved the generosity, but for Andre, it was also a survival strategy. Yet this didn't mean slowing down entirely. In 2019, his Maastricht concerts shattered attendance records. Thousands sang along as he smiled, bow in hand, a moment that could have been the perfect ending to a career. But Andre wasn't finished. Then the pandemic struck in 2020, halting tours overnight. For Andre, it was the longest pause from performing in his adult life. He used the time to rehearse, record, and stay close with his orchestra. But it also forced him to reflect on what life without constant touring might look like. When restrictions lifted, his return to the stage was electric. The audiences were bigger, louder, and more emotional than ever. People had missed live music, but Andre confessed he had missed them even more. In recent years, his tours have continued with lessons learned from the past. Schedules are smarter, travel is gentler, and Pierre remains by his side at nearly every performance, still watching, still ready. At Wu, Andre Rieu continues to play with the same passion that made him a global icon. But those who know his story understand the weight behind every note. Each concert now feels like a victory over the illness that once threatened to silence him forever, and yet one decision looms quietly in the background. In a private conversation, overheard by someone close to the team, Andre and Pierre discussed the possibility of one final world tour, the largest they had ever attempted. No dates have been set, no details revealed. But if it happens, it will test everything they've built together: the music, the stamina, and above all, the bond between father and son. And for the first time since his comeback, the real question is no longer if Andre can do it, it is whether he should.